Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Madison Realty Capital, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, AmTrust Title, Ariel Property Advisors, Customers Bank, Capital One Bank, Meridian Capital Group. Additional funding has been provided by grants from AVR Realty Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Colliers International NYC, Collins Building Services, CPEX Real Estate Services, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handler Real Estate Organization Handro Properties, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Castamatidis Red Apple Group, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Matone Group, Mercantile Bank, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Group, SJP Properties, Stonehenge NYC, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Merengoff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Organization, Moynihan Capital Partners, and these friends. It seems like everybody wants to own apartments in New York City, but certain people tell me that the residential rental regulations with the government and other problems cause difficulties, coupled with interest rates are rising. So today I've assembled three people who truly understand the residential rental market in New York City, and they're going to provide their insight. My guests today include the legendary investment sales broker, Aaron Jungreis, CEO, Chairman, Grand Pupa of Rosewood Realty. The man who lends money, it depends on the time. The man who's the Chief Credit Officer, Senior Executive Vice President at New York Community Bank, John Adams. And last but not least, the Israeli friend of mine who's been here for a couple of years, who's bought and sold, mostly bought, he doesn't like selling, only predominantly in Manhattan, but maybe one day in Brooklyn and Queens. Ofer Yardeni, who is the Chairman and CEO of Stonehenge NYC. So what has happened in your career? How do you see the residential rental market today as compared to many years ago?
So I started in the late 80s. And when I started as a real estate broker. And during the crisis of the saving and loan, I saw how values for commercial real estate really got destroyed. But on the other hand, the guys that owned residential multifamily here in New York never lost a building, and maybe the rents declined a little bit, but overall they kept occupancy and they were able to keep the building. So when I started to buy, I focused on the multifamily, and our occupancy was always over 95%. Rents were always increasing, and we bought buildings in New York that were all rent stabilized. We would tend to buy rents that were 50% of market, price per square foot 50% below replacement cost, and 60 or 70% below condo. And the business plan was very simple. Buy from the old families that own it for 3 generations, buy the buildings all cash, improves, do all the MCI improvements, buy the tenants, and combine units and increase income in those buildings. So the business plan worked extremely well. And
so what's happened over the last 30 years?
So
has it changed today?
What changed today is that definitely the current law makes it a lot more difficult in the residential, the multifamily here in the cities and the boroughs. Clearly, the rules and regulations are a lot tougher to get the apartments to be deregulated. They passed law that if the tenant pays less than $2,700 a month and you get vacancy, the unit is still rent stabilized. And my business was always about arbitrage, how to take the rent stabilized and to create a fair market and to increase the rents and utilize basically the laws in New York to our advantage. And things change.
So if we're hearing that it's harder to change the rents and harder to buy out apartments, Aaron, why are people continuing to be so bullish on New York City residential rental apartment buildings?
Well, look, New York has a unique set of rules. It's the best city in the world. Everyone wants to come here. Investors still think rents are going to go up. Rents have hardly gone down. Even if they have gone down, people give a month concession, and now that's dissipating. And also the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens are getting better and better. So there's so much population influx coming in that people want to be in New York and in the surrounding areas. So right now, even though rates have gone up and the market's definitely gone down a bit, people still want to be in the city.
Why are these major REITs, UDR, Avalon Bay, Equity Residential, selling their residential apartments? What is creating this impetus to sell?
I think that it's not just why the REITs are selling. If you look at the multifamily, the rent stabilized 20 years ago was owned by major families. Then the institution started to get involved in this business, and they poured billions of dollars to the multifamily. Especially we know about Stuyvesant that was acquired twice by major institution. And today with the new regulations that are passing, institutions are not necessarily going into the rent stabilized, they are going into the fair market buildings. Now what happened with the buildings that Equity Residential and some of the institutions that they are selling is that they bought those buildings 10 and 15 years ago. And those buildings were brand new construction. And today, those units needs to be renovated and upgraded in order to compete with the other buildings in the neighborhood. And they, as companies that need to provide dividend, cannot afford to utilize their cash flow. And they rather sell those buildings and buy in different markets where they can get a better return and a better yield on their investments.
John, as a lender, are there new buyers? Are there people that you haven't dealt with in the past?
Right now, I think other than the stock of good portfolio borrowers that we have, generational families, it's just a lot of smaller guys getting into the business.
Everyone wanting a piece of the rock.
Everyone wanting a piece of it, yet they're not really savvy enough to look at what could happen. We're starting to see requests for 8, 10, 12 units. You lose three tenants, you're underwater in some of these buildings. So we're seeing a lot of that, so we're walking that plank very cautiously, but for the most part, it's still the same people we've been doing business with for 30 years.
I could remember if I had Ofer on the show 2 years ago, and we would say, interest rates, we should lock in the rate. Fortunately, Ofer did lock in the rates in many of his buildings. Aaron, you've been involved with other properties. You've locked in your rates. Today, if you have to refinance, you're talking about nearly 50% higher than the rate was a year and a half or 2 years ago when we were at a 3.25 rate.
Yeah.
Okay, how are you underwriting that as a lender? Because everybody says that rates are going to go up even again.
Well, thanks to our friends, the regulators, over the past couple of years, we've now had to look at stressing the interest rate, the what-ifs, and part of the underwriting process is you take that current NOI and stress it at so many bips above the contract rate and see how that handles a shock. Want to make sure you still have coverage. So that's one way. And years ago we didn't do that, but when you were at a 5-6% interest rate market, it really didn't matter. It will matter for some.
Right, because right now we're at a 4.5 to 5% rate, okay, and then with the projected idea that there's rates increasing over there, it's different over there.
You mark my words, you'll have lenders out there in low threes who didn't do any sort of shock, and when it comes time for those loans to come due and refinance, it's going to be hard.
Do you see more and more people taking an interest in Queens and the Bronx today than before?
Yes, and Brooklyn, absolutely. Look, you go to Brooklyn, the whole skyline has changed.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. 10 years ago, it was nothing compared to what it is today. The Bronx, definitely people are going there. The Bronx has a lot of power. It's still staying strong. It's lasting. People want to go there. I have a couple of 1031 buyers who are looking there, who've sold in Brooklyn and want to go there they're chasing return, which is unbelievable. We have a fund we just did a deal with in the Bronx. Queens is harder to get into. For some reason, not as much trades in Queens, but we're actually moving a big package in Queens now, but at a much less price than the seller thought he would get. Probably 10, 12% less.
But if you look at all the trades that Aaron is talking about in Brooklyn or in New York or all the brand new buildings, they were purchased by institution, not so much by private individual. I would say that the private individual are playing up to the game of the $100 million, where you need $50 million equity or 40. But when you are starting to look at the deal on Dean Street that happened in Brooklyn that Forrest Sidney Ratner sold, that I looked at it very seriously. They are bought by institution on the core plus fund, and they are not going to buy the typical rent stabilized building the same as the other institution used to buy on the Upper West Side or the East Side and build on the assumption of turnover. That game is changed. When institution is looking at those deals, they look at it if you are not going to have any turnovers. That's
Because the
business.
institution does not need, especially if they're a publicly held company or a large entity, they don't need the negative publicity of pushing tenants out.
It's not about negative publicity. I've been doing business with institution for 25 years here in New York. We in the rent stabilize, and not every landlord is pushing the tenants, and not every landlord is not acting in bad faith. So you can create harmony between the tenants that are living in the building. And if you think about the buyout, at the end of the day, the landlord is the best thing that they have, that the tenant can have. Where can a tenant go and sell his lease on his apartment? He can't go to the bank and leverage it. So let's stop making the landlord on the negative side, that they take advantage.
We can't call them the big bad wolf anymore.
No, because if you look at it, it's the best thing that the tenant at the end can have if he wants to move to Florida, if he wants to move from a 3-bedroom to a studio to 1-bedroom. And I paid one tenant $800,000. It was the happiest day of his life, because where he never earned $800,000 in his life.
Would you explain to my audience how you could buy out a tenant for $800,000 and get a good return? Why did you buy the person out?
So the tenant is very simple. He had an apartment of over 2,000 square feet on a very high floor that I needed to get control. He paid $3,100 rent stabilized, and that apartment on the market is worth $22,000. So for me to pay $800,000, renovate the unit, another $200,000, I'm at $1 million. If I'm able to get an increase of $20,000 a month, it's $240,000 a year. But Michael, if you cap it at 3, 4, 5%, it's another $7-8 million. So I made tremendous. The tenant, when he left, he hugged me, he kissed me, he gave me a bottle of wine and flowers, and he told me that I changed his life. So not every story that you hear about a buyout is a negative. Clearly, there are some groups and some landlords that take advantage, and I understand that. But this is not the issue. The issue is why people like the multifamily here in New York, because it's very, very stable. It's very secure. Majority of the time, you'll have rents increasing. Occupancy will stay close to 100%. It's like the gift that keeps giving, because every few years you can finance and the asset improve. And as Aaron said, there is huge demand here.
At the beginning, I said we're talking only about New York City.
Yes.
And we've spoken about 4 boroughs. We haven't spoken about the 5th borough. What's your thoughts of Staten Island?
Staten Island, there's no activity. I'd rather go to Jersey, or I'd rather go to Yonkers, or anywhere in Westchester. Staten Island has
what do you attribute the lack of interest in Staten Island?
We can't explain it either.
Train.
Train, I'd say that's probably
Train is the biggest
one of
thing.
the main. But I mean, we have a large presence in
You
Staten
have a
Island.
bank.
We've got Richmond County Savings Bank, and we see nothing. We see
So
nothing.
what do you lend on in Staten Island?
Yeah, there's a couple of multifamilies here and there that pop up, but I mean, really, when you look at the whole portfolio, it's barely anything, which is a little surprising.
Have you ever been to Staten Island?
When he goes to
I
Jersey.
don't think I've been in Staten Island, but I'll tell you what, I enjoy going to Brooklyn. I think Long Island City is an amazing area, and Brooklyn, all the developments that are happening in Brooklyn, and if I buy in those markets, I will buy the best buildings in those neighborhoods with the most amenities, with the best view, because when the market softened, those buildings will keep their value.
tendency, right? As a,
And you can't compare a building in Long Island City with a building in Greenwich Village. That's a mistake that a lot of people are doing. You need to compare the people that lives in the Upper East Side on walk-ups on First Avenue and Second Avenue. They can go to Long Island City, live in a building 50-story with a swimming pool, great views of the city, great amenities, and there are 12 minutes to Midtown Manhattan. These are the targets that we are looking. These are the people who are moving to those buildings in Long Island City. It's not somebody that will move from Mary Hill, from a luxury apartment building, to suddenly to Long
okay,
Island
so
City.
I have a question,
Sure.
which I didn't discuss previously in the green room, which I'd like to discuss because it relates to the residential rental market.
Yeah,
Co-living,
yes.
a subject that when I discussed about a year and a half ago with you on a panel, you said very few people would move into a co-living space. I read an article that you like co-living now.
So there was an article that quoted me, but I was never interviewed and never discussion. And the guy that came apologized about the situation and in fact donated to the FIDF or Sloan to the hospital a few $1,000s because he said that the reporter really took things out of connotation. The way I like co-living, because co-living didn't change from people sharing apartments.
Co-living has been the root of the apartments in New York City
forever.
forever, okay?
But what I do not believe is that at people at the age of 35, 40 years would like to be in a communal kitchen and communal shower. It's against the vision and the philosophy of the American culture. Because people in New York, American, they like to own, they like to have good quality life, and I think that it can exist because it's a big country. It's a big.
But the co-living, the Ollie's, the Common, these other companies who are doing co-living, like there's a building in Long Island City that's being
Yes.
the majority of it is co-living.
Micah, it's all about the bottom line. So when the bank looks at the number,
Which
there
I'm
is
going to ask the
income,
banker.
and there is expenses. So if a building that we have 500 units, we typically have 750 or 800 residents because people share. But that's not co-living in the way you call co-living. We create an amazing amenities, and really those kids don't want to leave the building. We call it play hard, work hard, never leave the building. What you are looking as a co-living, where they have space that is communal for kitchen and shower. So theoretically, you have less space to rent, and then you are never occupied, and your repair and maintenance are a lot higher. So the collections are a lot tougher. And at the end, the bottom line, you have less than what we have. That's my
As a
thought.
banker, how do you see co-living?
We're traditional. Shares is no problem, like Ofer said. Many of the
That's the
buildings-
majority of New York City. People have always done shares. A couple of people from college or
Let's
different
face it, they
cases.
don't use the kitchens.
They don't use the kitchens. The co-living is you're taking the space, you're reducing it to a small size. You go to the philosophy that all you need to bring is the toothpaste into the room. My problem on co-living is, first of all, when you're sharing an apartment, you normally know who your tenant is. When you're going to a co-living, you have no idea who your
But
tenants
this is not
are.
an issue anymore because with social media, people are so connected. I don't find the issue that people will not rent an apartment with somebody they don't know. Think about it. You go to a college in the United States, you get a roommate you don't know, and after 2 minutes, they know. So young kids get along. I'll give you an example, my building on 6th Avenue and 15th Street, where I created with my team the best amenities that you can imagine. And the apartments are nice, but not so special. We're getting $100 a square foot for units, as John said, that they don't cook. They barely even shower there because they go to the gym in other buildings. And they want to live because they enjoy the vibe and the atmosphere. Most of the tenants don't cook in their apartments, so the whole idea of the co-living and the co-sharing, it's not working, and it's not scalable as a business.
Aaron, are people coming to you looking to buy buildings for co-living?
They are, but when we show them the buildings, they have a hard time coming up with the offer and taking a hard contract, so I agree with Ofer.
Because most of the co-living companies have really become management companies as opposed to operating the buildings themselves, which changes the perspective over there. Are we seeing foreign investors coming back?
Yes, they're here.
Where are they coming from?
Sweden, very few from China. We still have some Middle Eastern investors, but definitely we still have a lot of European investors, some South American. No, we have a lot of foreign investors. Not as many as a few years ago.
Are we seeing people making investments in Coney Island, in certain,
In Coney
East
Island,
New York?
definitely. East New York.
I know.
You have an obsession with Coney Island and Staten Island. I mean,
They're islands.
oh, okay.
Coney Island, yes, slow. East New York, definitely, especially near the train. I would say the whole Bronx is emerging, so definitely there. And in Jamaica, which is emerging, Jamaica was having a tough time 15 years ago. There's a lot of new development. A lot of people are going to Jamaica. A lot of people are looking in Jamaica.
By the way, I see tremendous capital coming from Europe, foreign investors. They do not necessarily come as the buyer, but they are backing guys like us, the operator. Aaron and I did a deal with a group from Sweden, and it's very obvious why they are buying. Their 10-year treasury is 0.66 or 0.75, and they buy 2.5% cap rate. So for them, they have a positive leverage. They don't even finance those deals.
Now, the people from Sweden, are they hiring internal management companies?
Yes, they have their own management, or they are hiring an outside management, or they will join somebody that will invest with them. But every opportunity fund, every core fund that is investing in New York, and when you utilize name from Blackstone to Invesco to Carlyle to every institution, they raise capital around the world. So they are the front, but who is funding those institutions?
Right, the foreign investors.
The foreign investors. So they are here with professionals. So I think right now we see tremendous capital coming from the Middle East, including Turkey, because wherever there is distress in the world, if it's Argentina, if it's Brazil, if it's Turkey, if it's Greece, if it's Spain, they want to come here because here it's safety, there are rules, and they know that their capital will be protected. It's not so much how much they will make on their money, it's that they will be able to get their money back.
Mr. Banker, are you seeing people convert their residential buildings to condominiums again?
No.
Aaron?
No.
Dead.
From 1980 to around 2000, we had 400,000 conversion for condominiums for all co-ops. The market is right now went completely on the different direction. People are looking to buy to hold as a rental. There is no market for condo. There's no market for co-op. It's almost out of style. People are looking to move from stability to flexibility. And what do I mean? They don't necessarily want to own a car. They don't want to own an apartment. They want to be free from responsibility. They want to rent. Today they want to live in the Greenwich Village. Tomorrow they want Upper West Side, Upper East Side. Transaction costs in New York are almost 10%. In order for you to make money on your deal, you need to have 10% appreciation. There is no appreciation on home ownership.
Well, you brought up an interesting topic today with regard to parking. Very few people are using cars, okay?
Yeah.
You as a banker, how do you look at the parking garage business?
I love the parking garage business. I would do parking garage business here in the city all day long.
So I like also the garage business, and in fact I was contacted by the guy from Uber, the founders, where they are going to look at create in basement of buildings communal kitchens, where people instead of having to open restaurants, and that's a different segment one day we'll talk about creating restaurants, and Uber will deliver from those parking. I definitely believe that the parking will suffer, but still it's New York City where people want to
People
drive.
always coming in.
Yes.
People always need a place to park.
Don't you have something called Maven in your building?
Yes, I have Maven, of which is a great program. And again, we created it because we saw that people do not want to buy cars. So we provide our tenants with GM a car on demand. All you have to do is use your application. You can reserve a car, and you don't have to pay for fuel. You don't have to pay for cleaning or insurance. You can drive and
Similar
park
to a
in
zip
every...
car. So it's a zip car.
Yeah,
concept.
but you can park in every Icon garage for free. So it's a great program for the tenants.
And then bikes.
Of course, we provide bikes. And the next big phase will be scooters.
When the next time I see an investment sales guy like Aaron wearing, a helmet on a little scooter, it's going to be interesting. So I think in summation, look, the residential rental market is strong. People are still renting. People still come to New York. And it's been a good market. I'd like to thank Aaron,
Thank you.
John, and Ofer, and I'll see you next week.